Well, the second week of the Winnipeg Baroque Festival gets underway tomorrow with the largest ensemble to perform in the festival in its history. The Manitoba Chamber Orchestra will be presenting a program entitled Solace, which features the music of Baroque stalwarts like J.S. Bach, as well as his son, Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, and Antonio Vivaldi, while also providing music that speaks into the Baroque period that was written in the last century. There perhaps is no leader more suited to those challenges of the program than Aisslinn Nosky. The acclaimed Toronto-based violinist and leader will be featured in this concert alongside oboist Caitlin Broms-Jacobs. Both join me in the Classic 107 studios to tell us more about Solace. Good morning, you two.
Good morning.
Good morning,
Thanks
Nolan.
so much for being here. So maybe I'll start with you, Aisslinn, with the title of this program. How does Solace resonate through this program that audiences will hear tomorrow night?
Yeah, I think the name actually originated out of the idea of programming this really beautiful piece by Jocelyn Morlock, whose music has really, getting to know her music has really been a revelation to me. And actually somebody at Manitoba Chamber Orchestra suggested this piece, and I had not heard it, though I'd heard of Jocelyn's work. And I really fell in love with it and thought that the gentle, really sort of comforting nature of the tuneful orchestral writing that she does, which is very evocative of Baroque music, I thought it would be a suitable sort of centerpiece to build the program around.
It's amazing to have this repertoire that it not only is written in very recent memory, but also grounded right here in Manitoba as the centerpiece for a Baroque-inspired concert. How does, maybe to you here, Caitlin, how does Jocelyn's work sort of dovetail with everything else that you're hearing in the program as you're preparing?
Oh, wow, that's a great question. I mean, Jocelyn's work as a whole, I would say, is very sincere, personal, and emotional, with many layers of depth. And I think that in quite a different way, many of those things actually apply to Bach as well. I think Bach is his music is joyful and dark and incredibly meaningful, personal, but I think above all sincere, and there's a commonality there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was drawn to this quote as I was doing my research for this concert that J.S. Bach gave about music as a, quote, refreshment of the soul. How does that balance, Aisslinn, exist between refreshment and solace if you think about the pieces that exist around the Jocelyn Morlock piece, Solace, particularly those that you are involved with not only as a leader but as a soloist?
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful quote by Bach. I hadn't heard that. Thank you. I mean, I think that there's the refreshing of the soul is something that I think I often take for granted, in that because I work so much in music and I'm so fortunate to have it be such a huge part of my life that my soul feels almost constantly refreshed by the music I get to experience. And I think, in planning out the rest of the program, I wanted to have things that would contrast the mood of refreshment, and there comes some solace with that too. But there's also really joyful moments. The Vivaldi's quite rambunctious, if you ask me, and the Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach String Symphony is really, I'd say, rhythmically driven. And so, there will be refreshment of the soul and solace, and also some excitement to make a well-rounded evening.
Well, it's so interesting to consider how you then plan sort of Baroque music around this centerpiece that you are encountering more recently. What goes into the planning of a program like this for you when you sit down and you go, okay, I have Solace by Jocelyn Morlock. Now I need to build out the rest of the program. What sort of factors are you then taking into account, both as a player and a leader, to come work with an orchestra that is not one that you are typically working with in your day-to-day musical life?
Yeah, when I program concerts with different organizations, I try to look at who comprises the organization I'm working with and what are their strengths and interests. And actually, in terms of Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, it was this was a relatively easy one because I've worked here over the years.
Yes.
Gotten to know Caitlin and her playing pretty well, and I thought, hey, what would Caitlin want to play? So maybe the question might go to Caitlin as to why she. I asked about. I think I maybe brought up the Bach, but then I think I did suggest the Vivaldi, and anyway, she took up the torch with enthusiasm. Thank goodness.
What is that moment then like when Aisslinn says, "Oh, maybe the Vivaldi," or maybe and you? What's your reaction when you hear some of the things as you're going back and forth to make this happen?
Of course, it's absolutely thrilling and flattering, and the best thing ever to get asked to do something like this. So I'm so grateful to Aisslinn for the opportunity to play these works. And the Bach BWV 1053 in F is one piece that I have loved for a long time, and I've always wanted to play. And so this was the golden opportunity. And I think one of the things that really draws me to this piece is that it sounds like some of my favorite movements, and frankly, everyone's favorite movements from favorite cantatas. Even though it's probably something that most people haven't heard before, it will sound very familiar. The first and last movements sort of feel like one of those big trumpet, celebratory cantata movements. And in fact, actually, the source material for this piece came from two different cantatas, and Bach wrote these cantatas during his Leipzig years. They're cantatas 169 and 49. I think those are the right numbers. And then about 20 years later, he reworked them into a harpsichord concerto. And somewhere along the way, a musicologist decided that this had also existed as an oboe concerto and reconstructed it. So it's quite a complicated story about the existence, or whether this oboe concerto existed in Bach's time, whether he really created a version of it. But frankly, none of that really matters. It's absolutely Bach's real music, and I think that people will feel like we're in very familiar, wonderful territory.
It seems like there's a wonderful balance that has been struck between, if you're like a hardcore Baroque fan and you are keeping score of all of the different cantatas and source materials and whatnot, you can have that level of engagement. But also, if you are a relative rookie in this field, there's also a wonderful way in which to engage with these melodies that are perhaps familiar, but maybe you just can't quite place where these are. Speaking of different levels of engagement here, Caitlin, this orchestra, the MCO, doesn't necessarily play Baroque music all the time. In fact, it has a wide range of different repertoire that it presents throughout the year, as we detail here on Classic 107. What's it like to work with the orchestra on repertoire from the Baroque alongside somebody who is well studied in the repertoire?
Well, obviously it's amazing to work with Aisslinn. Like, she brings so much knowledge and depth of understanding of this repertoire, amazing ideas, new ideas, things that other people aren't doing. We have this amazing spirit of, I think, togetherness. It's really making music as an ensemble, a collaborative kind of thing. And we just always love everything that she offers. And I know that I speak for the orchestra as well as myself. And, at MCO, we do play more Baroque music than most sort of modern ensembles, largely because of our size and our makeup, and because there is such an appreciation for Baroque music in Winnipeg. So I think that we're all quite versed in the style, and so which I think then allows us to maybe even appreciate what Aisslinn has to offer even more.
So Aisslinn, within all that, you're nodding vigorously along with everything that Caitlin is saying. In the same vein, so we have this sort of balance that we've struck with players that are very much familiar with the style, but also players that engage in this wide variety of repertoire. In the same vein, we have this program that not only has Vivaldi and Bach, but also Jocelyn Morlock and Krzysztof Penderecki, which I don't know that has been done in Manitoba I'm really racking my brain for the last time that Penderecki was done in this community. Is there a different sort of an approach that you take within looking at these two sort of different times? In other words, music from the Baroque and music that maybe speaks into the Baroque period. Is there a different approach that you then have to take, or is it informed by the same sort of principles that, as Caitlin says, the orchestra is very well steeped in?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think in some ways there's actually not much of a difference in my approach between very, very old and very, very new. I'm always trying to make the music seem like something the composer would recognize if they walked in the room to listen to it. I mean, and I in the case of Bach, music by Bach and Vivaldi, I'm making what is really a guess. I try to make it a very educated guess, but I have no idea. I hope that they would recognize it if they came in the room. And now Penderecki, again, it's the same approach in that regard. If he was to be reincarnated and walk into the room, I would hope that he would recognize and appreciate what we're doing with his music. So there's sort of a spirit of sleuthing and trying to figure out what the composer's intentions were in all of my approaches. And actually, I like that very much about very new music and very old music. I often say when I'm working with composers who are still living, I'm asking the same questions I wish I could ask Bach, but, in the case of Chris Dirksen, who's a composer working and will be in Winnipeg soon, she'll actually answer me. And it's instead of me just going, hey, universe, Bach, what do you think? I'm my mind. And so I love those conversations with living composers. It's very exciting.
Yeah. It's interesting to also consider the different methods in the actual execution of the music for a concert like this, because you have music that's in a Baroque style, but also you have the actual Baroque music that requires a sort of specialized type of technique and facility and skill. How does the approach to playing Baroque instruments, the actual technique involved, resonate through the ages on this concert on a technical level through your instrument?
Yeah, well, with MCO, when I work here, we do use modern, air quote, modern instruments to perform the Baroque music on. And so I won't necessarily ask the players to do anything specifically different with their instruments, but I'll instead try to draw our attention collectively to a different aesthetic or sound world that we might be going to. Some of the differences between Baroque instruments and modern are quite subtle, and my violin probably looks almost the same as a violin that someone would see at the Winnipeg Symphony. The strings are different, giving it a different timbre, but the visuals, it's almost the same. Really, it looks like a violin. Now, Caitlin's oboe looks very different than a Baroque oboe, and I'm no expert, so I won't try to describe it, but I know there are way more keys on the one that she's playing, and so that I really would be curious what Caitlin thinks about the different approach to the music on a modern instrument.
Well, so I would say that as a quote-unquote like modern oboist playing Baroque music, my approach is a combination of Baroque appropriate phrasings and things that I've learned through the years from Baroque specialists, people like Eric Lussier and Henry Enbrecht, and then now from Aisslinn, and that kind of influence. I grew up listening to Tafel music all the time and things like that. And so, but I also combine that with what you can do on a modern oboe, which is very different from what you can do on a Baroque oboe. And there's, in some ways, the modern oboe has more capability in terms of like phrasing, details, the registers, the dynamics, the things that you can do. And so I like to take advantage of all of that, even though I know perfectly well a Baroque oboe would never play it exactly like that. I'm not playing a Baroque oboe. And so I love playing Baroque music on a modern instrument because I have all these ideas that I can try to bring to fruition that I know that don't exist in the Baroque, on a Baroque oboe, but I think are worth trying.
You'll be trying in a couple of different venues over the next couple of weeks here, Caitlin, within the Winnipeg Baroque Festival. Not only will audiences get to enjoy you performing in Solace, but also as a member of your duo Fierbois, coming up in just a little while in the concert Love and Madness.
Yes.
How do you think that this program, this Solace, adds to this ongoing dialogue that the Winnipeg Baroque Festival is having with this time period, but also the dialogue that the festival and the music that it's offering is presenting to the musical community here in Winnipeg?
Wow, that's a big question. Well, In the Love and Madness program, we're diving into some music that isn't heard very often in Winnipeg. So I think that just adds to the scope of the Baroque Festival, which is there is so much within the category of Baroque. And so we're playing some French Baroque music, which I would say is a completely different style from German Baroque, which we hear so often here. And we're going to really try to do a deep dive into that French Baroque style and hopefully bring it to life in a way that people will really hear this is French. And we're playing some Italian. We're playing Vivaldi's violin trio sonata, La Folia. And that will be me and Maddie, Katie, and Jan. And Jan Kochman, who's the principal flutist of the Winnipeg Symphony. He's also my other half.
Yes.
And so that's going to be, in some sense, quite different.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, connecting with the Vivaldi that Aisslinn and I are playing together, which is like true Vivaldi in all of its flair and flash and fun.
Oh my gosh, there's so much to interact with then for Winnipeg music fans to then have that sort of kaleidoscopic approach to seeing this era of music. When it comes to approach here, Aisslinn, what do you take away from participating in this musical community in Winnipeg back into your other projects as you travel all over the world, really, to perform?
Well, every single time I've had the pleasure of coming here and working with the Manitoba Chamber Orchestra, I've left with all of my, I like to call them my inspiration tanks, are absolutely filled because I am fortunate to get to work in a lot of different areas of, well, mostly North America, but sometimes in Europe as well. And it's really rare to come across a group of musicians who are not only as skilled as this orchestra is, but as open to exploring different styles and as committed to doing it in a really collegial, fun, and impassioned manner. So I love coming here.
Well, friend, we always love having you here. Solace taking place at 7:30 tomorrow night at the Crescent Arts Center on Wardlaw Avenue. More information can be found at themco.ca or at winnipegbaroquefestival.com or at our website, classic107.com, and the Classic 107 app. Aisslinn Nosky and Caitlin Broms-Jacobs, thank you so much for joining us in the Classic 107 studios to tell us more about this program.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks, Nolan.